Hey everyone, so this is the second video for personality, for abnormal psychology, which deals with mood and personality disorders. So we're gonna look at these two categories in this video, and then we'll have one more video after this on schizophrenia and a few others. Um, but anyway, so mood disorders are the disorders that deal with the emotions of an individual. Um, they're usually they usually affect the emotions in a negative way, but there are some that affect them in a positive way, and we'll get into that in a minute. And then personality disorders are disorders that deal with the overall personality or have specific negative personality traits. And we'll get more into that here in a little bit. So, starting with mood disorders, these are disorders that are characterized by kind of constant, ongoing, dysfunctional emotions, usually negative. They sometimes you hear these called affective disorders, like affect in terms of emotion. Um, and in the DSM and kind of just in general from psychology in general, they take mood disorders and they uh, break it down into two kind of bigger umbrellas, which are depressive disorders and bipolar disorders. So we'll talk about some depressive disorders. Then we really only talk about one bipolar disorder, which is what is known as bipolar disorder, bipolar 1. Um, but yeah, we'll get into that in just a minute. So we'll start with depressive disorders. These are disorders that cause serious disturbances in a person's emotions. Usually, this is something that causes people to lose pleasure and happiness from things that should and normally would bring them happiness. Um, usually causes sleep problems as well, and can sometimes lead to negative thoughts to the point of self-harm or suicide. So there's that. And then also, these are it impairs someone's ability to function normally. So someone with depression or any type of depressive disorder usually has trouble going about their day in a regular fashion. It usually prevents them uh, from really going through life as they should. Um, so so there's that. Okay, so sorry, I thought I had something to add there, but moving on. The main disorder under the depressive category in mood disorders is what's known as major depressive disorder, and these are or this is sometimes called the common cold of psychological disorders. I don't like doing that because I think it takes away from how serious it is by kind of implying that it's not that big of a deal. But it's called that because it's so common. It's one of those disorders that is a large number of the population deals with on a regular basis. Uh, Again, this is a continuous and long-lasting negative mood, depressed mood. Um, Usually, people who deal with this have trouble getting out of bed in the morning. That's where the lethargic thing comes from, right there. They usually have trouble going about their life in a regular fashion. It impairs their relationships, their job, their hobbies. Um, it just makes things very difficult for that person to carry out because of the negative emotions that are going through their mind. Um, so uh, so that so again, and by the way, this slide and is a couple years old, so the statistics might not necessarily be 100% up to date, but they are probably pretty close to what to what is true. Um, but again, major depressive disorder is one of those that it doesn't affect everybody the same. Some people never get to the point of the extreme of, like, suicidal thoughts or self-harm or anything like that, but you could, and if it goes untreated for long enough, that becomes a very distinct possibility. Um, but you can see the experiences there on the right of the graphic. Depressed mood, trouble concentrating, loss of interest, appetite changes, suicidal thoughts. Like all these things are very common if you suffer from major depressive disorder. Also, the very kind of an interesting thing to me is that about 1 in 6 people are going to go through, according to this, is going to go through that in their lifetime, at least some form of it, which is close to 20% of the population. So it's a very it's a very common and widespread disorder, and something that a lot of people have to deal with. And like I said in the last video, it says that women are twice as likely to develop this as men, and that's not necessarily that women are always going to be twice as or there's always going to be twice as many women than men with that have it. This is just diagnosed cases, and like I said in the last video, men tend to have a problem seeking help sometimes. So there may be more men with depression than cases. I can almost guarantee you that's probably what's happening. So, um, but anyway, this is very very widespread, and but it's treatable. There are plenty of treatment options, and we'll get more into that in the second half of Abnormal Psych. Um, but yeah, it's a pretty widespread thing. Now, dysthymic disorder, this is something that is a little bit, I think, in my opinion, a little scarier than major depressive disorder. And the only reason I say that is because while the symptoms might not be as severe, um, it tends to come and go in waves. In other words, like you may go months without having any issue, and then all of a sudden you're hit with, really intense depression feelings, and that's tough for anyone to deal with. So it's something that it can be pretty scary and hard to treat, kind of like generalized anxiety disorder, in that you don't know exactly what's happening and what's causing it. But excuse me, but it can be pretty serious, and it can get to the point of the same symptoms as major depressive disorder as well. Okay, seasonal affective disorder. This is a very interesting one, and just side note, its acronym is SAD, which I find kind of ironic. But seasonal affective disorder is a disorder in which weather patterns or change of seasons or uh, hypersensitivity to melatonin, which is found in sunlight, or causes the release in the body in natural sunlight. Um, so this is basically the example I use is, like on, you can't tell from the video, but it's raining and very kind of dark here, and it has been all day. So this is, this is the type of weather where you're usually not in a great mood. You're usually kind of sad, maybe a little more, uh, a little more sad than normal. And that's So imagine that same feeling, but it's like amplified, and it can happen anytime the weather changes or the seasons change. Um, and it has the same types of symptoms as major depression. So lethargy, or being lethargic, really negative emotional thoughts, things like that. And it's not caused by necessarily anything in your life. It's just caused by the seasons or the weather. And that's, really, really difficult to deal with. Um, Sometimes you see this manifest in, there are some areas of the country like Seattle that it's very rainy, kind of cloudy all the time, and it has a high percent of suicide as compared to somewhere like Key West or Miami or something like that, where it's great weather almost all year. So that shows you that that type of feeling or excuse me, that type of feeling because of the weather and everything can be manifested in people who don't suffer from this, and that this is just amplifies that even more. Okay, so now moving over to bipolar disorders. These are disorders that swing between the depression stuff that we just talked about and the opposite, which is mania or a manic episode. Um, and this is, kind of the opposite of depression. Not happy necessarily, but almost quote unquote crazy, because it's like a break almost with reality. Um, but someone who suffers from bipolar disorder, basically, it just means that their emotions can go from depression to manic, um, you know, very quickly, without any warning. Um, it can happen completely out of the blue. The good news with bipolar disorder is that it is treatable. In fact, it's pretty easily treatable as long as medication is, or as long as the proper medication is found and used on a regular basis. I've had students in the past say that, "Oh yeah, I have bipolar," and you honestly wouldn't have known that, but because of their medication, they take it on written and they use the right medication, and their emotions seem pretty normal. But um, it can go really haywire if it's not controlled or treated. Um, yeah. All right. So now moving into personality disorders. So these are disorders where someone's personality um, is kind of inflexible, and as it says there, they're unable to modify it in certain situations. And what that means is that you and I, we're able to recognize, okay, in this scenario, this is the type of personality that we should kind of show. We shouldn't try to be funny in like a funeral setting. Like that's just, understand that's not the personality that needs to be shown there, or the type of personality. People with personality disorders don't understand that as much, or they just can't change their personality um, because of the disorder that they have. And because of the fact that it deals with our personality, it usually shows up as our personality is maturing and kind of getting set in stone, and that is usually adolescence or early adulthood is when these start to show up, and they usually last through adulthood. So the first one, and probably the one that you've heard the most about, is antisocial personality disorder. And this is not antisocial like they want to be alone and away from society. This is like antisocial, like going against society and going against what is expected in society. A profound disregard and violation of the rights of others. People who harm others, whether it be through violence or just, tricking someone for personal gain or whatever. Um, Usually people, who do that have some form of this. They don't show any remorse. They know what they're doing. They know that what they're doing is wrong. They just don't care. They could not care less. Again, I don't ever say always. I don't want to say 100%, but pretty much every serial killer, if you looked into like their diagnosis, probably has some type of antisocial personality issue. Um, because they are able to find the weaknesses in others, usually for their own personal gain. And they are usually very poised when confronted about it. So that's why you hear about serial killers who get confronted by police or by their, spouse or neighbors or friends or whatever, and they're not found out because they are very surprisingly able to hide it with great success. This is basically what a sociopath would be. A sociopath is someone who has who knows exactly what they're doing. They know it's wrong. They know they're not supposed to. They don't care. They're all looking out for themselves, even if that means harming others. So that's antisocial. Borderline, you don't hear as much about. Borderline personality is when you have trouble regulating your emotions in your personality. So this would be someone who basically is unsure of what their personality is, and they have trouble dealing with it on a regular basis. And so therefore it's very unpredictable. You usually have pretty severe mood swings from time to time. Poor self-image, sometimes self-harm and suicide is a characteristic. But this is someone who almost as if their personality is uncontrollable, and they can't figure out what to do with it, and that leads to the negative views of themselves, and sometimes, like I said, the manifestation of destructive behavior as well. All right, these next two often get confused with one another, so that's why I put them on the same slide. So narcissistic personality disorder and histrionic. Um, Narcissistic, if you've heard of someone being a narcissist, they're all about themselves. They think they're amazing. They have a grandiose sense of how important they are and how amazing they are, and they need to be excessively admired. They always have to be told how awesome they are and how great they are, how pretty they are, or whatever. Um, and they are willing to do whatever it takes to achieve their own personal gains, even if that means harming others. So that's a narcissist. Now, histrionic is when you want to be the center of attention for any reason, good or bad. Um, so they will go out of their way to get attention, bring attention to themselves, even if it is in a negative sense. They just want to be talked about. They just want to be the subject of the conversation, the center of attention. Narcissists have to be told they're awesome, they're great. That's their center of attention. They don't ever want to be looked at in a negative way. So with narcissistic, again, it's all about the individual and how awesome and great they see themselves, and they have to be told about that, and they have to be kind of reminded over and over and over again how awesome they are in their eyes. And then histrionic, it doesn't really matter if they think they're awesome, they just want to be the center of attention. They just want to be talked about, good or bad. um, and it doesn't matter whether it's in a good way or a bad way, they just like being the center of attention. All right, and then obsessive compulsive personality disorder. This is um, not the same thing as anxiety OCD that we talked about in the last video. This is um, when thoughts and behaviors become part of someone's personality, and therefore they're perceived as normal. So, like little quirks, like this would be like someone who, obsessively thinks about how their hair has to look. So they always make sure their hair looks great no matter what. Um, and while it's not as extreme as obsessive compulsive anxiety disorder, it can lead to some stress and anxiety, excuse me, some stress and things like that. But it's not the obsessive thoughts and compulsive behaviors that the person knows are not normal and wrong. These are perceived as normal, like, oh, of course my hair looks this way because it's perfect or whatever. It's not someone who washes their hands 20 times a day even though they don't want to, but because they have to get rid of the thoughts. It's a little bit different than that. Um, all right, so that's it for this one. We got one more video talking about schizophrenia and a couple of other disorders, and yeah, that'll be that. So see you guys then.